A wise man once said, be good or be good at it. The Chevy Spark is an econobox. It cuts corners, it pinches pennies, and it squeezes passengers. But a car like this should always exist. Spending less money on cars is a safe piece of advice, but in 2024, it's hard to follow. The most bare bones new Honda Civic will run you $25,000. A Camry LE? That's almost $30,000. See, a lot of brands these days will use the same basic platform in both their more expensive models and their entry-level stuff. This generally results in better cars, but they're also more expensive. Whereas the Chevy Spark was made from the ground up to be affordable. Think of it as a purebred box. Made by what was formerly Daewoo and now called GM Korea, the Spark uses a foreign mindset to the American market. There are a few modern amenities that are nice to see, but for the most part, if you don't need it, you're not gonna get it here. Which is why this was 13 grand when it was new in 2017, and it's also why you can find one that's 5 to 8 years old for 5 to 8 grand. Though take notice that higher trims demand a higher budget. Under the hood, you won't have 200 horsepower, and you're not gonna have 100 horsepower. Just a naturally aspirated 4-pot with port injection. Maybe this seems like it would be too pokey, but you also need to remember this weighs like 2,200 pounds. The punitive numbers don't stop there. This also has just a 9-gallon fuel tank. The tires are a motorcycle rivaling 185 millimeters wide. The car itself is just 12 feet long, but more importantly, its width is literally akin to the wingspan of a medium-sized Canadian goose. This means that if someone parks like they're down a couple of eyes, you can still nab that spot. Briefly, if you enjoy fun and practical car content, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. Thank you. And since this is the LS grade and not the high roller LT, we almost take it back to the 80s when we're talking equipment. So you will have roll down windows. This also forgoes power mirrors, and it comes with manual locks. Since the car is puny, you can reach and unlock and lock each individual door from the driver's seat, but they take it one step further because there's actually no release for the trunk on the inside. You have to, each time, come up, pop it like this. The trunk itself is very short in length, but it does have a actually pretty good amount of height. The seats do fold, though not flat. And one thing I was a little surprised to see is that every Spark does make room for a spare tire. But I think this one actually started off the phrase donut. Oh! Initially on the inside, it kind of feels like a depressing McDonald's play place. There's a lot of dark, cheap materials everywhere, but the construction of everything is surprisingly solid. And on top of that, it should be very easy to clean, especially since the only thing that's padded here is this armrest. But hey, it has one, and you can even move it out of the way if you want to cuddle with your passenger, because they're going to be very close to you. The dimensions here allow me at 6'3" to have a good amount of headroom and even enough leg room, yet it does begin to feel cramped once you have passengers. But really, this never intended on being the road trip car. And for someone who just wants to commute, it has a few important modern amenities like automatic headlights, Apple CarPlay, even here with the 2017, and surprisingly, 10 airbags. A lot of people might not think that's a big deal, but when you're shopping for a $5,000 car, some of the vehicles you're looking at won't even have side airbags. And unlike a lot of new cars, you still have an extremely straightforward layout. So 3 dials for your HVAC, a few buttons for your infotainment, not a big screen, but it's simply laid out. Response time is still just as good as any modern Subaru. And you even have a multifunction display in the gauge cluster, which is actually controlled through the stock. There's no buttons here on the steering wheel. This is, again, the LS. We're also missing tweeters. So the 4-speaker sound system is what you think it is. The seats also get the job done, even if they're not too welcoming to human bodies. Your thigh support is a little lacking. The bolstering is very minimal. Don't even think about trying to adjust your lumbar. But driving this an hour at a time, I really haven't had any issues, even with the tilt-only steering wheel. Though you will have to cook up a compromise if you intend on having adults in the back seat. But in a pinch, this can work, though its skinny figure means that only 2 can sit in the rear. If you can live with those things, there are numerous perks to this microscopic machine. One is that it's surprisingly fun. Not because of the engine, but instead, the 5-speed manual transmission. You could get it with a continuously variable transmission, but that's gonna hamper the little bit of performance that you do have, and it also brings with it a few reliability concerns. So if you can drive the stick, I would recommend going with the 3-pedal model. In fact, the owner of this one actually learned how to drive manual with this car just a few months ago. And it is good for that purpose. The bite zone of the clutch is pretty wide, and it grabs in a fairly linear fashion. The pedal itself is also light. It also comes with a hill hold. The shifter is smooth, but this transmission is not all that mechanically satisfying. Both with the pedal and the shifter, there's a little bit of rubberiness here in the lever, but there's still some communication there of when it engages into the gear, and like most other manual transmission cars, it just adds another layer of personality to it. I think it could be geared better though. This 1.4 liter inline 4 makes 98 horsepower, which means that you're gonna have to downshift quite a bit, but also when you're shifting from first to second, there's a pretty steep difference in gearing, and without the torque to compensate, it really is not that happy if you're trying to snap off those gear changes. It's really not the point of this car, but let's see what it'll do to 60 anyway. With the automatic, some outlets would report around 11 seconds to get to 60, so 10.1 seconds on a hot and humid day means that the manual is definitively quicker when flat out, and I wouldn't label the acceleration here as dangerously slow, maybe just mildly concerning. If you want to pass, you might have to downshift a couple of times, but it'll do it. Accelerating at highway speeds, you can tell the car is just not really that happy. However, it doesn't fight you too much to cruise at 70 miles per hour. The only thing is, the RPMs at 65 are just a hair below 3,000. And there is a considerable amount of wind noise, some tire noise too. It definitely delivers on the subcompact car experience, especially when again you have the LS grade without cruise control. And because this doesn't have the turbo or direct injection like the Cruise did, the engines have actually been pretty dependable for their owners. And with the manual, it should be a robust car all around. It seems like there are 2 noteworthy potential weak points with the Spark. One is with the automatic transmission, which is a Jatco-built CVT. It's not a guaranteed bomb, but I'd avoid it if you prioritize longevity. Additionally, some have reported a brake vacuum issue, which can cause the power brakes to fail. As scary as that is, it doesn't seem abundantly common at this point. Honestly, finding any consistent problems among forums and carcomplaints.com with NHTSA reports is difficult. The stuff that goes wrong appears miscellaneous, and its basic approach is reassuring. I'd feel confident recommending this to someone that wants cheap, reliable transportation. Do I think GM Korea quality will make this a 300,000 mile plus car? I don't know, but if you do need to replace some things, at least it shouldn't be very expensive. In fact, that's another thing. Running this car is extremely cheap. So this one has been averaging 40 miles per gallon over the last few months, which easily beats the EPA rating. And while, yeah, you could get a Corolla hybrid that would smash that fuel economy figure, the consumables on this are really cheap too. The rear drum brakes hardly ever need any attention. The parts are gonna be cheap. The same goes with the tires. The insurance cost should also be easy to stomach. But there are some usage scenarios where this would be kind of punishing. One of those is on the highway. Pulling it up to 65 miles per hour, you're revving just a hair below 3,000 RPM. You will quickly become accustomed to tire and wind noise. This is just the reality of living with a subcompact car that has very little insulation. This one, again, does not have cruise control either. Now, when I said it was fun to drive, it's more because this is almost the closest thing we can get to just driving around in a spirited golf cart. The steering is maybe a touch on the slow side. There's definitely some vagueness there on center. This does not feel too happy cornering at high speeds, but it's still able to change direction pretty quickly because of its lightweight. Feedback is minimal, but the weight is appropriately light. And when you're going slower and you're not fighting body roll, it's kind of just fun. So this will have a torsion beam rear suspension, something that you would expect at this price point. And when you do hit large imperfections, potholes and whatnot, it will break its way into the cabin. You'll feel it. But over the usual city streets and broken back roads, the Spark is compliant and more than just tolerable. I think the big conflict here is that if you can stretch your budget or go with an older car that carried a higher price when new, you can easily find more comfort. And there will be a pretty notable difference just stepping up to a car like the Chevy Cruze or Honda Civic. Standard compacts, they'll just feel more substantial. So why even pay attention to the Spark? The main reason is because, like the other used cars, it is a form of personal transportation, but this can be had for the same or less money with fewer years and or miles under its belt. And its running cost is next to nothing. This exact car is my brother's. He was comparing it to cars like a 2004 Hyundai Santa Fe, maybe not the worst vehicle that's ever existed, but you know, it's rusting in various different corners, it has 150,000 miles, and it needed a little bit of work. Sure, it was $4,000, but this was just a little over $5,000, and it's 13 years newer, which means he got the tech, modern safety features, and importantly, the assurance that most of the components on the car aren't already worn out. Unfortunately, with the Spark's demise and its foes from Kia, Hyundai, Mitsubishi, and Nissan saying goodbye or preparing to do so, this type of attainable car is not going to exist for much longer in the US. And I think the world of automobiles will be a worse one without them. If you're at a point in your life where you just don't want to spend money on cars, but you need one, the Chevy Spark is among the best options I can think of, and, at least with the manual, it fits the bill while providing a plucky personality that's easy to love. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like to help me take on the maniacal YouTube algorithm. Consider becoming a member to help me take on larger projects and for an additional podcast. I'll catch you in the next one.